It is Friday, July 3rd. Let's talk PlayStation. Alright, so I feel like I say this every single week, but we do have a lot to go over, so let's start with our PlayStation Plus reminder. You don't have a lot of time left to download June's games. On Tuesday, it'll move over to July, and that will be NBA 2K20, Rise of the Tomb Raider, but also a bonus game, Erica. So we're getting a bonus game because it is the 10th anniversary of PlayStation Plus. We've had the service since the mid-cycle PS3 days where it was just a straight-up reward service and it wasn't required to play online. But it is the 10th anniversary. I think this is definitely a solid month. Rise of the Tomb Raider, great game. Erica, one of those smaller scale FMV style games, doesn't take long to run through, so a lot of people are enjoying that. NBA, of course, people don't like, but still a pretty solid month, although I would have liked a little bit more for the 10th anniversary. Either way, because of the 10th anniversary, Sony's letting out a number of interesting factoids about the service's history over the years. So one thing we learned, over 1,000 games has been given away on PlayStation Plus, part of the Instant Game Collection, which that's including all the PlayStation Minis that they gave away, which are those small scale PSP games. Then we got an emulator on PlayStation 3. They also gave away PS1 classics, but those are stuck to PS3, Vita, PSP, never came to PS4, unfortunately. But if you were a diligent subscriber for 10 years, you made sure to download every single game, and let's say you only liked a quarter of them, you still made away with 250 some odd games that you actually enjoyed for $60 a year, so not too bad. Sony also told us the top 5 most downloaded games out of the Instant Game Collection, which they're mostly recent titles, and that's just purely off the fact that you're going to have higher subscription numbers the closer we are to the present day, but that would be Call of Duty Modern Warfare Remastered, Sonic Forces, Shadow of the Colossus, Call of Duty Black Ops 3, Destiny 2, so pretty interesting, nice to see Shadow up there amongst all those games with a much wider reach. But also, if you are not a Plus subscriber and you'd like to play some PS4 games online this weekend, that is something that Sony is also graciously letting you do. So outside of just the free-to-play MMOs that are commonly allowed to be played without Plus, you can also play online for free this weekend. Next up, Sony has formally announced their PlayStation Indies initiative. So this is the project that Shuhei Ishida was appointed to after stepping down from head of Worldwide Studios, and they have coincided this announcement with 9 brand new independent games coming to PS4 and PS5. I am very much looking forward to Worms Rumble in that lineup. I love the Worms franchise. That game is so much fun with a group of friends, I'm telling you. But I'm just happy that Sony is doubling down on indies just like they did in the early PlayStation 4 days, and that kind of went away through the life cycle of PS4. But we're going back to the basics here. I love it. Give these games some much needed attention. Sony will be giving out more details down the road. That would probably look like more game announcements. But also, we're going to be getting indies coming on a rolling basis on PlayStation Now every single month, so that's also nice to hear as well. Moving on to some VR news, Iron Man VR drops today, a PlayStation VR exclusive, and it's reviewing quite well, so if you did pick it up today, I hope you're really enjoying the experience. It's always important to highlight, I feel, for situations like this where this game is about 8 to 10 hours long, so more of a full-scale experience, or what people are really expecting or hoping out of something like virtual reality content, where a lot of it is more palatable experiences where it's like an hour to 2 hours long, maybe 4 to 5 hours long, but we don't have many full-scale game examples on PlayStation VR or just the VR platform in general, so it's always nice to see a completely original game from the ground up built for virtual reality that actually takes a substantial amount of time to finish. And what's also great to hear is that out of Dreamscom, we have a confirmed date for PlayStation VR support. That is July 22nd. So I cannot wait to see what people do with VR support. I mean, the base game alone is already incredible with the tools that people are using to flesh out these full-scale levels and projects. And they're doing it very quickly, right? The tools appear accessible, but then they get much more complicated. And for the people that can really get into that stuff, I mean, it's impressive what they're doing. And so for VR content, it might take a little bit to see some really substantial levels being published, but otherwise, very encouraging. Now, for this next one, we have Naughty Dog's Neil Druckmann, who was on a podcast for, the podcast for raising funds for homeless youth, and it's conducted by Harold Goldberg, but also formerly of Nintendo, Reggie Fils-Aimé, which is interesting to have this dynamic here. But Neil Druckmann was talking about how the team has been dealing with a lot of the hate and vitriol that's been thrown at them for the past 2 weeks now. And Neil had some quotes I'd like to share with you all. He said, "I think you have to create some separation to say, we made this game, we believe in this game, we're proud of this game, now it's out there, and it's like whatever reaction people have, whether they like it or not, that's fair, that's their reaction, and you don't fight that. The other thing with the more hateful stuff, the more vile stuff, that's a little harder. It's especially harder when you see it happening to team members or cast members who play a particular character in the game." You know, it really is a double-edged sword where Naughty Dog, their backs are against the wall. They're going to be naturally defensive about the game because it's their project, it's their baby, and they care about it. Even if you dislike this game, I think you're being a bit ridiculous to act as though they didn't care about this project for years and tried to make something very meaningful. Even if it didn't land for you, that is where they're coming from. But at the same time, now we're seeing this back and forth between anybody that worked in the game and the consumer, and it's not looking pretty in certain circumstances, and that's really the case for the general discourse around this game. We're 2 weeks onward, and it has not gotten any better, where it's just straight up ugly and exhausting. I mean, depending on where you go, you can certainly have your opinion validated, but if you even so much as try to engage in civil conversation with somebody that has a dissenting opinion from yours, it often divulges to what we're really getting at here: the hate, the vitriol, the personal attacks, and it sucks that that is happening so commonly around this game. It doesn't need to be like that. But of course, this is the internet, and this is an area where I don't think it will ever really improve, especially for projects like this where they're highly regarded and beloved from 2013, and you get a sequel and it's just not what you wanted. It's just, I wish people would be better to each other, but that is asking too much. Now, we also had a very unusual circumstance where Rob Zacny of Vice wrote a review for the game, which wasn't super favorable. Didn't really enjoy the game that much, but a representative of Sony representing Naughty Dog reached out to him over on Twitter through DM, I believe, and more or less said, you know, they felt as though some of the things mentioned in the review weren't fair criticisms, and they didn't acknowledge the more meaningful changes of the game. And Rob said it wasn't a confrontational interaction, but rather it was just a very unusual one. Now, FYI, it's not uncommon for publishers or developers or any PR people to reach out to people that have done reviews, but that's usually for something more factual, right? Like something factually was wrong in the review, or you know, something that is going to be fixed, or something that's been fixed and the review copy was an earlier patch note or something like that. But this was a very odd circumstance that was publicized, and it's once again another layer of just not a good look from Sony, not a good look from Naughty Dog. Some people didn't like the game. It's something that Sony and Naughty Dog have to deal with, and clearly the game is a massive success anyway, selling over 4 million copies in 3 days, making it the fastest selling PS4 exclusive ever, and it's surely going to hit over 10 million in its lifetime, no doubt. But going back to that interview with Reggie Fils-Aimé and Harold, another thing that Neil was touching on was PlayStation 5, how the Naughty Dog team will be looking forward to the new hardware. So he had this to say: "You always feel like you're pushing against a bunch of walls and finding the little cracks where you can to take things a little further, whether it's memory or CPU or hard drive speed. When you start a new generation, it's a double-edged sword. On the one hand, you have to build new tech for the new hardware, and that can be an uphill battle. But on the other hand, all of a sudden you feel this freedom of, oh my god, we can breathe again." He goes on to say, "We do so much work on our end. Once you start the adventure, you never see a load screen, and there's so much work that happens behind the scenes of how we design the levels, how we chop them up, and it's all invisible to the player. You never see any of that work, but now, knowing that we're going to be able to load things more quickly, it just means that designers don't have to be constrained by how they lay things out, how we think about things when we load new characters, so I'm excited to see the doors open for us." Now, that last paragraph I really want to highlight. If you remember, we did a video about PS5's SSD and SSDs in general, how they change game design. One thing I really tried to stress in that video was developers for decades have done a very good job at managing these constraints with memory, and whether that looks like a long corridor or an elevator ride or something like that, right? It's still often hidden. There's a lot of tricks that are employed, and so a lot of designers are very used to this, and they just think like this when they approach a lot of projects. But the important thing was they really don't have to think like that anymore, and so this might be something where people don't even really notice what has changed in terms of a game design perspective. But at the very least, we have a very purposeful example of Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart, where you see these worlds transfer in a matter of a few seconds. Now, for our final Naughty Dog related news story, we have another example of some talent moving over to this not-so-secret Sony San Diego studio that is working on an unannounced project that many are suspecting to be another Uncharted. Could be a new IP. I prefer a new IP, but it's probably another Uncharted based off of all the talent that's getting moved over. But Zach Oliver was an environment artist at Naughty Dog for Last of Us Part 2, Uncharted 4, Lost Legacy. Now he's a senior environment artist as recently as June, now at VASG, Visual Arts Service Group. This is the cinematics and motion capture group that is for many Sony first-party developers and second-party, but we know that this team was formed as early as 2018, and so because of that, at least, we have to wait probably another year at minimum before we get any sort of teaser, trailer, or announcement for whatever the studio has been working on. Now moving on to Epic Games, where they've been talking more about Unreal Engine 5 and PS5, and now we've got this rather unusual praise for PS5 coming from Nick Penward, the VP of Engineering at Epic, where he was speaking to the official PlayStation magazine, and he had this to say: "The PlayStation 5 is a masterpiece of systems design. Not only is it driving a huge leap in computing and graphics performance, but it is also revolutionary in terms of storage and data compression technology, unlocking new kinds of games and experiences for players to enjoy." The context here, of course, is that he's speaking to the official PlayStation magazine, so you better believe he has something nice to say about the platform. But just beyond this hyperbolic comment, when we look at what other third parties have been saying about PS5, where they're more impartial, we can really surmise, and I totally believe at this point, that in all likelihood, if we're really comparing it to, say, Series X, both these machines are already very easy to work on. I mean, that was the biggest advancement of the 8th generation of consoles, is basing these machines off x86 architectures. But I can totally believe at this point that PS5 is a slightly more developer-friendly environment to work on. Now, another thing that Epic talked about, and this is when they were speaking to PCGamesN.com, is that the geometry rendering budget for that technical demo that we saw for Unreal Engine 5 was about the same as Fortnite running 60 FPS on consoles, which is fantastic. Some people are getting this misconstrued. It's about the efficiency, so it's not as GPU intensive, which is a good segue to our next news story about Lockhart, the lower-priced Microsoft machine that is currently rumored. It's always important to sometimes bring up these bigger Microsoft stories because there's always that slight Sony influence that we can jump off of. But to get us up to speed with this platform, if you have not been keeping up, we've known for a little bit about the targeted specs of this machine, and now we're hearing about when we'll actually see it, which Eurogamer and even Jeff Grubb are hearing that August is when we'll actually see a formal reveal of this machine. But rumors for a long time have already pointed us in a direction that this machine is obviously going to be lower priced. I think Kotaku initially reported that this machine won't have a disk drive, but that's not necessarily confirmed just yet. But specs-wise, it would actually have the same CPU as Series X, which would technically be a faster CPU than PlayStation 5. It would have slightly less RAM. There's a little bit less of an overhead there because the GPU is where they're really cutting costs here. It would be around 4 teraflops, which, keep in mind, we're only mentioning the teraflop number here because this is a decent measure for most people to understand. And also there's some immediate comparisons of, 4 teraflops, that's the same as PS4 Pro, that's less than X1X. This architecture moving forward, the microarchitecture, is RDNA 2, which provides massive efficiency leaps over GCN, which is what we currently use on PS4 Pro, X1, X1X. So 4 teraflops is actually, what this machine can do is actually still going to be quite capable. So it's all about scalability with this machine. There's a lot of misinformation about how this thing could potentially hold back next gen. But basically what Microsoft is proposing to the consumer and compromising with the consumer is that this machine will still produce some very visually stunning looking games, but it will take a resolution hit. It will probably be a 1080p 60 FPS machine, probably 1440p for some games. Really depends on the nature of the game, of course. But that would be Microsoft's proposal to accessibly buy in an next gen, whereas with Sony, they're both PS5s. One just doesn't play discs. That doesn't give Sony a whole lot of room to cut the price in a dramatic fashion. I think it's just going to be $50, like with what we saw on Xbox One S all digital versus the regular Xbox One S, right? It was a $50 deficit. If you go past $50, let's say $100, you have to sell more software, and even accounting for the fact that it's through PSN, so it's more of a cut for Sony. Over the lifetime of a console, you never really see an attach rate over, let's say, 8 or 9 games. Some consoles, it's gone over to 10 or 11 games per console, and that's the lifetime of that machine, lifetime of the install base. Sony's just not going to, do that with the all-digital PlayStation 5, so it'll probably be $50. That gives them enough room to see their return on each machine, because inherently, it's a brand new hardware launch. All these consoles are going to be sold at a loss just right off the bat, right? But when we look at this Lockhart machine, it's a different scenario where it's taking cuts in other areas. Maybe it won't have a disk drive, but it will also have a less powerful GPU, less RAM. So Microsoft can afford to price this machine at, let's say, $399, which in all likelihood will probably be where that falls to. These are still very capable machines, and they're still already being sold at a loss, so I don't think any lower than $399 makes sense for that machine. So I think what we're really looking at here with the overall hierarchy is $399 for Lockhart. Then you get to $499 or $449, excuse me, for the all-digital PS5, $499 for Series X and PS5. That's what makes sense to me. I know everyone's getting really caught up in this whole undercutting each other thing, but these are big multi-billion-dollar corporations. I mean, they really can't reasonably, right off the top, take off another $100 off the MSRP of these boxes when they're already going to be losing money at, let's say, $500. Which, while we're talking about price, we can go into our next news story, 100% a rumor. I think we're really soul-searching on this one, but a few people are talking about this now, so we'll bring this up. But one Twitter user by the name of Robert Serrano responded to Jeff Grubb's Summer Game Mess, where he flat out said PS5 July 13th will be price, pre-order, and release date announcement to be confirmed. The reason why this person appears credible is because they actually tweeted out one day prior to the PS5 reveal event. The scheduled event would be July 11th, which turned out to be true, and so some people are assuming that maybe they know something. He does say that he knows he has connections in the entertainment industry, says this event could be a little bit sooner if it's not July 13th, and that it's not an event, so it could be something like a PlayStation blog write-up post, which is not entirely impossible. The problem with something like this is that price announcements for brand new hardware is almost always at E3. It's very, if we're going to go off history, this is very traditional, always during E3. We are past E3. So this is unknown waters where who knows when we'll get prices for these machines. You would assume they would coincide with events, so Microsoft doing it either in July for this new round of their game showcase, or August where they'll presumably show Series S, which would probably make more sense for them because that'll show their lineup of consoles, which would be both of them, right? Sony, you would assume for that state of play that we're hearing about in August, but maybe it could be sooner. A nice little July stopgap since they're not going to talk about anything else. I don't really know. This is something, though, where I wouldn't really believe this guy right off the top, even from this small little piece of evidence. We've had little Twitter situations like this before, and we've done enough of the insider stuff where we see that a lot of it ends up not being true. But every so often, there's always one or two of them that do hit the mark, and so that's why it's still somewhat fun to look at them. For our next news story, and this is a really big deal, this transpired yesterday and not many people are talking about this, but Bloomberg is reporting that Sony is looking to place a bid on the holdings company Leyou Technologies, and the timeline that we're seeing here is that negotiations were happening in May, then it fell through because of COVID. Now this deal might actually take place in July, whoever ends up getting it, which Sony's interested, but also iDream Sky, which is another holdings company in China, and one of their investors is Tencent, so they've got a lot of capital, obviously, but the number being tossed around is about $1.23 billion, and Sony's hoping to secure the deal with just a greater path to financing. So if they can secure the financing, there's a better security for Leyou Technologies that the deal will actually go through if their bid is accepted. But Leyou Technologies has 6 subsidiaries. So they have Digital Extremes, Splash Damage, Certain Infinity, which for Certain Infinity they have a 20% stake with an option to buy them out later. Radiance Games, Athlon Games, and Kingmaker Games. So this is a lot. There's a lot part of this deal. The big ones here would be Digital Extremes. They're most known for like Warframe, right? That free-to-play game, but also previous games like The Darkness 2 or Dark Sector, but they've got a really big portfolio. The other big ones, Splash Damage and Certain Infinity. So these two have done a lot of contract work and co-development for Microsoft games. That's Halo, Gears, Certain Infinity did a lot of Call of Duty multiplayer stuff, so they do different components of games, but they don't build all these games from the ground up. Well, some of them. But really, they've done a lot of multiplayer stuff. Athlon, Radiance, Kingmaker, they're lesser known, but Athlon Games has a stake in the Telltale game assets, and so that adds an interesting element here. If you remember when Telltale went under and then their assets got sold off. Also, there's a deal with Amazon and Athlon where they're doing a partnership for a free-to-play Lord of the Rings game. So there's a lot of layers here to unpack. This is kind of like another, I don't know, like another Sony Online Entertainment where that particular portion of Sony, when it was a part of Sony, really kind of operated independently, where they did some PlayStation content, obviously, they did PlayStation games, but also a lot of just straight up PC exclusive releases. They weren't really considered part of worldwide studios. And so this kind of acquisition would maybe fall in the same line here, and this would pull a lot of development talent away from Microsoft, acquiring all these very talented multiplayer studios, and also Digital Extremes, of course. They have their place. I mean, I think on the surface, most people would look at this and go, this isn't really a good match, but we've been hearing for a few years now that Sony wants to have a bigger presence in multiplayer content, and clearly they do have single player stuff locked down. They're very committed to the single player AAA narrative driven experience. So acquiring this much talent and it requiring this much money is huge. I mean, initially I thought, oh my God, are they really going to do that? Is this really, really a report that's accurate? But I don't know. This has a lot of implications. It really does. And it would be something where a lot of these games that these teams work on, they might just keep doing what they've been doing, business as usual, and Sony collects the revenue. I'm not really sure. There's a lot of layers to this that would probably really have to be ironed out if a deal took place. but it's not something we have a whole lot of time to talk about here, but there's so much more to be said about this potential deal if it goes through. Now, moving on, we've got our first example of a next-generation game being priced at $69.99, a $10 increase here in the US over what we've been used to for well over 14, 15 years now, since the start of the 7th generation of consoles, where games typically are about $60. NBA 2K21 will be $70 on PS5 and Xbox One. 2K has already been pretty forward, saying they feel that version of the game warrants that price increase. Also, for next-gen upgrades, they won't offer them for PS5 or Series X for smart delivery, but they will offer it if you pay $100 for the Mamba Forever Edition. That's the one with Kobe Bryant. And if you buy that version, you'll be entitled to a free next-generation upgrade. So this, of course, is something where it might be less about 2K and more about what other publishers are going to do. And this is something where it's a hot topic for some people, but it's just straight fact when we say these things, but games have been relatively cheap for a very long time. This is inherently an expensive hobby, just surface value, but game prices, just base game prices, not accounting for DLC, microtransactions, season passes, which everybody likes to bring up. The reason why they exist is so games can be further monetized beyond the $60, which is already pretty low, but not every game has that, so let's just keep that in mind too. Some games come out at $60, that's just what they are. $60 for their whole life until they devalue quickly, which games also devalue quickly. Anyway, games have been fairly cheap for a very long time, at least here in the US. Of course, other territories may have already seen a price increase during the 8th generation of consoles, but it could mean that it goes up even further for your territory beyond what you've already seen before. So it is cause for concern, but it's just something where it's just straight fact. When we talk about base games, not accounting for the further monetization efforts, so accounting for inflation, I mean, it's a very real thing. It's just fact. So it sucks, but this was kind of coming. What we can say is that we don't know for certain if other publishers will follow, but another thing we're hearing is that the consulting firm IDG has gone on record to say that other publishers are absolutely looking into increasing their prices for games. So now that 2K has stepped forward, a pretty big publisher, being open about it, doubling down on it, might not be good, but again, it really depends on the publisher. I mean, this generation saw pretty heavy adoption of $40 games, depending on what the project actually was. Usually like a remaster or a port or something, but it was nice to see that always come in. I mean, if this is something where this hobby is expensive to you, which I totally sympathize with, I'm pretty cheap myself nowadays, despite all the crap I've amassed, games devalue really quickly. So if you don't buy on day one, which a lot of people don't do it, right? And then for a lot of games, they do come down in price to $45 pretty quickly, and then $30, and then, you know, you wait a year, you'll see games for $20, $25, and that'll be the same case for next gen. Next up, we've got a story on backwards compatibility, which I did not plan this at all, considering that we just had a Tuesday video about this topic. But this is coming from the site GameSpark, speaking to Sony Interactive Entertainment Japan. They were asking some questions about PS5. So over on Twitter, Black Kite translated, we learned, just like PS4 era, if you have PS4 discs that were bought used, it will be supported. We will inform more details in the future, so please wait until then. That's great to hear. That was kind of expected. But then they also translate, we focus working on PS4 backwards compatibility so that users can move to the new console with their PS4 libraries. There's nothing we can answer about backwards compatibility with PS1, PS2, and PS3. So of course, everybody's looking at this and going, that's not a direct no, that must mean it's happening. Look, I just did a Tuesday video covering this topic very thoroughly for 11 minutes, explaining PS1, 2, 3 playback, Sony's history with it, Microsoft's history with it, how difficult it was for Microsoft to do it, how they monetize it, Sony's options. I think I lay out a pretty realistic picture and everything that you need to know so far about backwards compatibility. It doesn't look good. So I'm not trying to, lead you to believe that it might actually happen or that there's hope. I mean, I was even pretty optimistic a few years ago doing videos when we didn't know much about PS5, right? So I thought, maybe they are working on an emulator that like Microsoft did, because it does take years, especially if we're talking about PlayStation 3, for example, right? So look, the only thing I'll really add on top of the Tuesday video, which you really should watch if you haven't yet, is that if we get something for PS1, 2, 3 playback, it's not going to be discs, especially PS1. PS4 can't even read CDs. It doesn't have the laser diode for that. And I can guarantee you that they're not going to put that laser diode into PS5 so that you can play PS1 discs. I would love that. I'm the physical guy. I have all of these physical games, but probably not going to happen for PS1, absolutely. 2 and 3, again, probably no discs. You'll probably get what we see right now on the PlayStation Store for PS4 and even Microsoft, right? a bunch of games that are relicensed. It'll be a title-by-title basis. They'll curate what games get approved. It might be a better scenario for PS3 in the license section just because they're already on PlayStation Now, so that license might have some sort of perpetuity clause of, hey, it can stream to all these platforms like PC, right? Or it can have different delivery mediums like emulation. I don't know, maybe that's the case. Obviously, when we look at something like PS1 Classics, the license there does not go beyond PlayStation 3, PSP, and Vita, which really sucks. I have like 20 purchased PS1 Classics that I cannot put on PS4. I would love for that to be the case on PS5, but if we see any sort of emulation or path to older PlayStation consoles, it will be pretty limited. It will be. And that's really all I can add on this. I want to give you a realistic outlook on what's happening right now, and that's where we're at. Now moving on, we've got a new patent for picture-in-picture as a feature for a user interface, which this isn't really that new because we've actually seen this example in a different Sony patent where that was for the UI, what we think is the PS5 UI, and that example was actually in there for a picture-in-picture setting. But this particular patent is for this feature, which what I can add to this is that from people I've talked to, I can actually confidently say that this is coming to PS5. I don't know if it'll be ready at launch, might be later, but this exact feature in terms of watching a streamer, watching gameplay, video walkthroughs, or maybe even a streaming service like Netflix, Hulu, whatever you want, this will be a feature of PlayStation 5. That much I can confidently say. Also, Ghost of Tsushima, we now have the review embargo for this game, which is July 14th, 10 a.m. EST, so 3 days prior to the game coming out, which is good. It's always alarming if the publisher puts the embargo right when the game comes out. But no, 3 days prior, so I think Sony's a little confident that they have a pretty great game on their hands, and I hope so. I'm looking forward to the game, I really am. I'll pick it up day one, but I have a gut feeling that just based off of what we've seen, I think it'll probably be another Days Gone in terms of reviews where good, but also mixed, you know, not nines across the board. But I think it'll find its place for the audience that it's going for. But anyway, it's time to get to Let's Talk Plus, the weekly Let's Talk PlayStation giveaway where one of you can win a $10 PSN code. I would like to congratulate this viewer right here. I'll be contacting you very soon via email or Twitter. If you would like to win a $10 PSN code, it's very easy. Follow the link down below. We do this every single week on Let's Talk PlayStation. Supporting this channel a number of ways can gain you an entry, and I'll announce the winner next week because I'm trying to pay for your digital copy of Ghost of Tsushima. Those are all the news stories that I want to talk about with you all. Like I said, Tuesday video, backwards compatibility, free next-gen upgrades. Go check it out. Very thorough topic. Really covers everything. Grounded approach on all that stuff. So definitely a good resource. And coming up, probably not going to be this Tuesday, but we do have some more random game unboxings finally. Bought a few things. Also picked up a new Vita and some games. I might unbox that on camera, so that'll be fun. So the unboxing stuff's not over, and I'm working on some longer form videos because I know it's been a lot of the news stuff and conversation stuff, but this will always be a jack of all trades PlayStation channel, so we'll always cover older platforms and do our unboxings and documentaries. Those are still coming, but just working on those. And that's it. That concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. I'm Ryan Badecki. Thank you all so much for talking with me, and I will see you all next Friday.